what's happening there?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, first of all, that climate change has been a good thing for the Jura too, in that today, for example, you will always get delicious red wines from the Jura, which was absolutely not the case 20 years ago. Capitalization or enrichment, the adding of sugar to musts, almost unheard of now. You get extraordinary ripeness every year. So that's the good side of climate change. The bad side, it is frankly horrifying, if one lets it be horrifying, is that in particular, spring frosts have been completely devastating. So this is what's happened. There was a spring frost. I'm going back a long way now. So there was a spring frost in 1991, which was devastating. It only hit Jura. At the time, I was teaching about Loire wines on the ECT Level 4 diploma, and the Loire had devastating frosts in 91. I didn't know anything about the Jura at the time. Virtually didn't know it existed. 91 was this devastating frost. So when I started to get to know the Jura in around 2000, I heard about that frost, and every now and again there'd be talk about potential frost. There'd be a little bit of spring frost some years, but it was never really bad. It wasn't really affecting much. And then 2017, so that is 26 years later, so effectively a generation later, there was the most devastating spring frost, which was brought upon because the winter months were not very cool. Certainly the beginning of the year was warm. So the vines were developing too quickly. And again, this wasn't exclusive to Jura, but it was really bad in the Jura. There was a huge loss, on average, 50% down in 2017. So producers were quite stoic at that point. They just went, well, we haven't had a frost since 1991. So fine, we've had a frost. And then 2 years later, they had another one. And though it wasn't quite as bad, it was still pretty bad, and they were hardly recovering. And in between, they'd had a very hot year, 2018, where, yes, they'd had very, very good quantity, but they weren't sure how things were going to go. And then they had 2019, really bad frost. And then they had another one in 21. And the 21, honestly, I spoke to producers there who just said, even much older producers who would record every vintage conditions and so on, they said, we've never, ever seen anything as bad as this, because it wasn't only the spring frost, it was then a very wet summer with mildew and all the rest. And guess what? It's happened all over again this year in 2024. So to have 4 spring frosts in 8 years, it's really hard. And what's made it harder is that the years in between, although 18 gave good quantity and 23 gave good quantity, no other years did. So in the last 10 years. So in 2020 and in 2022, they had no frost, no problem there. But it was so hot and so dry that they were getting problems with drought, with sunburnt grapes, and so on. So it's a little scary, and they are trying all sorts of things to combat it, but it's sort of reactionary rather than preparatory. It should have been looked at a long, long time ago, but there we are.